Long before the first word was spoken, before humans built fire or carved the first marks into stone, there was a sound that echoed through the darkness of prehistory, a soft, almost imperceptible sound, yet profoundly human. A cry, a whimper, a sudden release of water from the eyes, inexplicable, uncontrollable, and yet universally understood. In that moment, a singular truth emerges. Crying is older than language, older than culture, older even than the tools we use to shape the world around us. It is an instinct woven into the very fabric of our being, as ancient and primal as the heartbeat itself. Early humans lived in a world of perpetual uncertainty. Predators stalked the forests and plains, seasons shifted with unforgiving precision, and death was an ever-present companion. Survival demanded vigilance, cunning, and strength, but there was another power, quieter and less tangible, that humans carried with them, the power to express vulnerability. To cry was to announce to the world, and to one another, a moment of need, fear, or grief. These were not mere signs of weakness, they were signals, deep and resonant, capable of shaping the behaviors of those who heard them. In the flickering light of a campfire, a cry could draw others near, invoking protection, empathy, or comfort. It was communication in its most ancient, raw form. Imagine the first infant, eyes wide and damp with tears, reaching out into the unknown. Its caregivers, perhaps exhausted, weary, and hungry themselves, respond. The infant's cry pierces the veil of survival instincts and awakens something distinctly human, compassion. Long before morality was codified or communities were formalized, crying bound individuals together. It forged connections that no spear, no hunt, and no shelter could guarantee. These early tears were not merely biological reactions, they were the first threads of social fabric. Crying is deeply tied to our biology. Even today, scientists recognize that humans are the only primates who shed emotional tears. This suggests a unique evolutionary path, one that links emotion to survival. In prehistoric times, a tear might have conveyed more than fear, it might have been a tool of negotiation, a subtle call for aid, a demonstration of trust. Through crying, early humans could signal not only distress but also honesty, sincerity, and need. It is remarkable to consider that the simple act of wetting one's cheeks could have influenced who survived and who did not. Yet, there is mystery here. The fossil record tells us little about tears. Bones cannot reveal sadness, and stone tools cannot capture grief. What we know must be imagined, reconstructed from fragments of evidence and echoes of what remains universal. Anthropologists can infer social behavior from burial practices, group living patterns, and caregiving structures. But the act of crying itself, how it felt, how it sounded, how it shaped relationships, is a story we reconstruct with empathy, reaching back across tens of thousands of years to touch the human heart. Tears are at once intimate and communal. They carry private suffering but also the potential to unite. In small bands of early humans, a single cry might have altered the course of a day, or a life. Perhaps it signaled that a hunt had failed, that a child was ill, that danger lurked nearby. Those who could read these emotional cues, respond with care, and form bonds of mutual aid stood a better chance of survival. Crying was, in a sense, a survival strategy encoded in emotion. Consider the paradox: an act so vulnerable, so exposed, could be so profoundly powerful. To cry was to risk rejection, to signal weakness, to invite attention, but it was also to forge trust, to elicit protection, to deepen connections. Long before law, ritual, or written word, the human heart found expression in this primal act. Every tear shed carried with it a silent message: I am here. I am human. I am not alone. And so, as we begin this journey, we step into the world of our ancestors, a world shaped by instinct, danger, and the first glimpses of empathy. Tears flowed in the shadows of the forest, across sunlit plains, and by the flickering firelight of early dwellings. They were at once sorrow and hope, fear and connection. They were, in every sense, a beginning, a prelude to the story of humanity itself. In this light, we can see crying not as a simple act of emotion but as a catalyst for the future. Every tear carried the potential to shape relationships, communities, and ultimately, the evolution of our species. Long before we understood why we cried, the world responded. And in that response, the course of human history quietly, irrevocably, began to change. Beneath the tears, beneath the trembling lips and quivering hands, lies a complex biological story, one that traces the roots of our vulnerability deep into the human body. To cry is not merely to express emotion, it is a finely tuned biological response, a symphony of hormones, nerves, and chemical signals that transforms the private landscape of the mind into a visible, tangible experience. Long before words existed, these silent chemical messages carried meaning across space and time, linking individual pain to the hearts of others. Emotional tears are uniquely human. While other mammals may vocalize distress or produce reflexive tears to cleanse the eyes, only humans shed tears as a response to emotion. Scientists have found that emotional tears contain higher concentrations of stress hormones, such as prolactin and adrenocorticotropic hormone, as well as natural painkillers like leucine and kephalin. In effect, each tear may serve as a release valve for the body, flushing out chemical markers of stress while signaling to others that something profound is unfolding within. From an evolutionary perspective, this is extraordinary. Imagine a prehistoric landscape, rugged and dangerous. A child cries in the midst of uncertainty. Their caregivers, attuned to these biochemical signals, respond. The tears are more than wetness on skin, they are a message encoded in biology. They signal vulnerability, honesty, and a need for assistance. In a world where mistrust could mean death, tears communicated reliability and need in a way that words not yet invented could not. The physical act of crying engages multiple systems simultaneously. Muscles in the face contract, eyebrows knit, the jaw trembles. The autonomic nervous system kicks in, sometimes causing the heart rate to accelerate, the breath to hitch, or the stomach to clench. These involuntary responses are ancient, hardwired mechanisms designed to externalize inner turmoil. When these physical manifestations are witnessed by others, they evoke empathy, drawing protective instincts and social care. Crying, in this sense, is both internal and external. It is a private release and a public signal at once. But the story of vulnerability does not end with physiology. Tears are entwined with our neurochemistry, linked to systems of reward, bonding, and attachment. Oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone, surges in moments of intimate connection, and crying can amplify its effect. This neurochemical interplay strengthens social cohesion, reinforcing alliances and mutual care. In essence, crying transforms private suffering into a force that binds groups together, ensuring that those who are vulnerable are also those most likely to be protected. The biology of vulnerability extends even further into the visual realm. Human infants are born with disproportionately large eyes, a feature that accentuates expressions of distress. Tears glisten in these eyes, catching light and drawing attention. Early humans, sensitive to these cues, were likely attuned to the subtleties of facial expressions, recognizing the intricate language of the eyes long before they could speak. This visual signal was amplified by sound, the wail, the sob, the gasping cry, creating a multidimensional signal that demanded response. Consider the paradox of this system. It is at once delicate and potent. To reveal vulnerability is to expose oneself to risk, yet in doing so, one activates a network of care that strengthens survival. Early humans who could express need convincingly, who could communicate distress without words, were more likely to receive help and protection. Crying, therefore, is not weakness. It is strategy encoded in biology, a mechanism as essential as camouflage, as vital as fire, as adaptive as any tool our ancestors fashioned from stone or bone. Crying also engages the brain's higher functions. The limbic system, responsible for processing emotion, interacts with the prefrontal cortex, creating a feedback loop between feeling and thought. This interplay allows humans not only to experience pain but to reflect upon it, to interpret it, and to project it outward. In a sense, tears are an early bridge between instinct and cognition, a biological canvas upon which emotions are painted for the eyes of the group. In this light, we begin to see crying as more than a reflex. It is a carefully orchestrated convergence of anatomy, chemistry, and neurology, a uniquely human expression of vulnerability with profound consequences. Every tear carries information, distress, honesty, need, and trust. Every sob ripples through the group, shaping reactions, fostering empathy, and strengthening bonds. Vulnerability, in this sense, becomes a form of communication, a biological language older than words, but no less powerful. As we consider the origins of crying, we recognize that what appears to be simple emotion is, in truth, an intricate survival tool. Tears are not just water and salt, they are chemical messages, social signals, and evolutionary instruments. They bridge the interior world of the individual with the collective needs of the group, ensuring that humans survive not only through strength but through empathy. In the story of our species, biology and vulnerability are inseparable, entwined in a dance that would shape the future in ways our ancestors could not yet imagine. Long before humans could articulate their thoughts with words, the eyes spoke. In the flickering shadows of prehistoric forests, on open savannas, beneath the relentless sun, early humans communicated through subtle gestures, glances, and expressions. The eyes became mirrors of the soul, windows into inner worlds of fear, hope, and longing. Crying, in this context, was not just an isolated act, it was a signal embedded in a symphony of visual cues, shaping relationships, forging trust, and even determining who would survive the perils of an unforgiving world. Our ancestors' eyes were unlike those of most other primates. Human eyes display a wide sclera, the white part surrounding the iris, allowing subtle movements and shifts to be easily detected. Even the smallest glance could convey intention or emotion. Early humans living in close-knit groups became experts in reading these signals. A sudden widening of the eyes could indicate fear, a fleeting narrowing could betray suspicion, and a tear catching the sunlight could demand attention and compassion. In this way, crying became part of a broader nonverbal language, one that was as vital as hunting skills, fire-making, or tool crafting. Imagine a group of early humans returning from a hunt. One of them stumbles, wounded, fear etched into every line of the face. The eyes, bright, glistening, and wide with pain, signal danger and vulnerability before the voice can even form a cry. Others respond instinctively. A companion steps forward to provide aid, another offers protection, and a third watches for predators. In this moment, the eyes and tears work together, creating a silent dialogue that maintains cohesion, signals trustworthiness, and ensures survival. Crying, then, is amplified by the eyes. The tear itself, glinting in firelight or sunlight, becomes a beacon. Scientists suggest that this visual signal is as important, if not more so, than the sound of a sob. The eyes convey sincerity, a truth that cannot easily be feigned. When early humans observed tears, they witnessed vulnerability laid bare, an honesty that demanded response. In evolutionary terms, this honesty was adaptive. It fostered cooperation, strengthened bonds, and reduced unnecessary aggression within groups. The early human face, paired with expressive eyes, became a canvas for survival. Micro-expressions, the brief, involuntary flickers of emotion, communicated urgency, danger, and need with remarkable efficiency. A subtle quiver in the brow, a slight parting of the lips, a tear sliding down the cheek, all of these small, nearly imperceptible signals carried weight in social interactions. In small, interdependent groups, the ability to read these cues accurately could mean the difference between life and death. Those who misread the signals might fail to respond to danger, miss a call for help, or alienate a companion. Those who understood them could protect, comfort, and maintain cohesion. The eyes were also tools for negotiation and alliance. In prehistoric communities, cooperation was essential, whether for hunting, gathering, or defending against predators. Tears observed through attentive eyes could elicit trust and solidarity. A mother weeping for a lost child, a companion expressing remorse or fear, or a wounded hunter signaling need, all these moments created social obligations. By responding appropriately, early humans strengthened the bonds that allowed groups to function effectively in an unpredictable world. There is an artistry to this primal communication. Eyes and tears together created a language without syntax, a grammar of emotion that could be understood intuitively. In a world without words, subtlety mattered. The tilt of a gaze, the flash of a tear, the depth of eye contact, these were gestures that conveyed more than speech could, weaving emotional nuance into the fabric of daily life. Early humans relied on this visual language to navigate trust, fear, joy, and sorrow. In many ways, it was the first form of diplomacy, the earliest mechanism for managing relationships and maintaining social order. The eyes and their signals also shaped identity within the group. Expressions of vulnerability and empathy were recorded not on stone but in memory, internalized by each member of the group. Young humans learned to recognize cues of distress and joy, mastering the art of social perception long before formal instruction or storytelling existed. This early emotional literacy laid the groundwork for complex social behavior, enabling humans to live in larger, more cooperative communities than any other primate. Crying through the eyes also created shared experience. When one individual's suffering was visible, the group collectively acknowledged it. Tears became a medium for communal emotion, a way of transmitting not just personal pain but shared understanding. In this way, emotion became a social currency, building trust and reciprocity that allowed groups to endure in challenging environments. The simple act of looking into someone's tear-filled eyes could forge bonds that lasted a lifetime. Even in the harsh landscapes of prehistory, moments of quiet observation and connection could transform survival. A pair of glistening eyes might inspire protection. A tear rolling down a cheek might compel care. The eyes and the emotions they revealed shaped decisions, alliances, and behaviors, subtly influencing who would thrive and who might falter. The silent language of tears and glances was a cornerstone of early human society, as vital as stone tools or fire. Through this lens, we begin to see crying not merely as a release of emotion, but as a powerful form of communication, as essential to survival as sight itself. The eyes and tears together created an intimate dialogue that predates words, culture, and civilization. Each glance, each tear, was a message of trust, need, or connection, one that could ripple through the group, shaping relationships, strengthening cooperation, and forging the foundations of empathy. In understanding these early signals, we glimpse the subtle genius of human evolution. Crying and the language of the eyes allowed humans to survive not just through brute force or cunning, but through sensitivity, perception, and emotional attunement. It is here, in these silent, glistening moments, that we begin to recognize the profound power of vulnerability, the way the human heart, expressed through the eyes and tears, could change the course of the future. In the dim light of a prehistoric dawn, the first human may have looked upon loss and felt something ineffable, a pang in the chest, a knot in the throat, eyes stinging with unshed tears. Grief is ancient, as old as our species itself, yet it is profoundly human. It is the shadow cast by survival, the cost of connection, and the mark of vulnerability. Long before burial rites or sacred rituals existed, grief shaped the lives, decisions, and societies of early humans. It was more than emotion, it was an evolutionary force, guiding behavior, forging empathy, and teaching the first lessons in mortality. Life in prehistory was precarious. Infant mortality was high, prey could slip through the hands of even the most skilled hunter, and the elements were relentless. Death was ever present, and humans, unlike most other species, possessed the cognitive and emotional capacity to recognize it. Grief arose not merely from instinct but from awareness, a dawning understanding that what was lost would never return. When an infant perished or a companion fell to a predator, the resulting tears and cries were more than biological responses, they were the first expressions of existential awareness, the recognition of fragility in a fragile world. Consider the first human who mourned a loss. Perhaps it was a child who had been sick, a sibling taken by accident, or a companion felled during a hunt. Their grief was raw, unstructured, and yet profoundly social. Other members of the group responded, some approached to comfort, some offered protection, and others silently observed. In these interactions, early humans learned the power of empathy. Mourning became a collective experience, a ritual before rituals existed, binding the living together in shared acknowledgement of mortality and suffering. The act of crying in grief was both individual and communal. On one level, it allowed the bereaved to release the physical tension of sorrow, the heart pounding, the breath catching, the chest heavy with loss. On another level, it sent a signal to the group, attention was needed, care was requested, and social bonds were reaffirmed. This duality, the personal and the social intertwined, illustrates the remarkable complexity of early human emotion. Grief was not weakness, it was adaptation. By expressing sorrow, humans strengthened connections, encouraged cooperation, and nurtured the survival of the group. Anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer societies have found echoes of these ancient dynamics even today. Small communities rely on shared recognition of suffering to maintain cohesion. When a child falls ill or a group member experiences misfortune, collective attention ensures that care is given and that survival is maximized. In prehistory, where every individual was critical to the group's continued existence, grief became a tool for maintaining unity and empathy. It created social obligations, compelling members to respond, protect, and nurture. In this sense, the first human tears of sorrow were both emotional expression and evolutionary strategy. The environment amplified grief's significance. Harsh climates, scarcity of food, and constant exposure to predators meant that every loss was felt acutely. Survival required not only skill but attentiveness to the emotional signals of others. Crying, wailing, and subtle gestures of mourning became languages in themselves, conveying depth of feeling and urgency of need. The group's ability to recognize and respond to these signals could determine the difference between life and death. A grieving parent might cry for help, a companion might respond with food, protection, or comfort. Grief became a form of communication, a bridge connecting the inner turmoil of one individual to the practical survival of the group. This early grief also laid the foundation for memory and cultural transmission. As humans observed mourning behaviors, they began to encode loss into the collective consciousness. The first funerary acts, covering a body with leaves, placing stones over a grave, or simply standing vigil, may have arisen from these instincts. By marking loss, humans acknowledged mortality and created continuity between the living and the deceased. Tears became a silent tribute, an acknowledgement of absence that preserved social knowledge and emotional resonance across time. The psychological dimension of grief is equally profound. Early humans had to navigate the tension between vulnerability and survival. Expressing sorrow invited care, but it also risked exposure to predators or rivals. The courage to grieve, to show emotion in the face of danger, reflects a remarkable evolutionary sophistication. It is the recognition that human survival is not purely physical, it is social, emotional, and cognitive. Grief allowed early humans to bond deeply, to reinforce trust, and to cultivate compassion, all of which were essential for enduring harsh and unpredictable landscapes. Grief also shaped identity. As individuals mourned, they learned about themselves, the depth of their attachments, the intensity of their fears, and the capacity of their hearts to endure loss. Communities, in turn, learned about the bonds that held them together and the obligations they owed to one another. These first expressions of mourning were exercises in social intelligence, emotional literacy, and moral development, forming the scaffolding of culture, empathy, and collective responsibility. Consider the paradox once more. Grief is both painful and instructive, a source of anguish and a vehicle for growth. Early humans experienced sorrow not in isolation but within the context of their social networks. Their tears, cries, and gestures of mourning taught others about loyalty, care, and responsibility. They established norms for empathy, cooperation, and protection that would echo through generations. In essence, grief was a teacher, guiding the evolution of human emotion, morality, and society. In the first tears of sorrow, humans glimpsed the fragility of existence and the power of connection. They discovered that vulnerability could forge strength, that shared suffering could cultivate empathy, and that grief could serve both the individual and the group. These insights, born in the shadow of mortality, laid the groundwork for civilization, ethics, and culture. The first grief was a turning point, a recognition that life is precious, that bonds matter, and that emotion itself is a tool for survival. And so, as the sun rose over ancient landscapes, illuminating the faces of those who cried and those who comforted, a silent transformation was occurring. Through tears, early humans began to understand one another. Through mourning, they began to shape societies. The first grief was not merely sorrow, it was the foundation of empathy, cooperation, and the human capacity to care. It was the beginning of a legacy that continues to define us, linking the deepest emotions of our ancestors to the emotional lives of all who would follow. Tears are often thought of as spontaneous emotional outbursts, moments of weakness, of private sorrow. Yet in the world of our ancestors, they were far more than that. Tears were tools. Subtle, powerful, and deeply adaptive, they shaped the way early humans interacted, survived, and thrived. They transformed vulnerability into influence, emotion into communication, and private suffering into a public force that could alter behavior, forge alliances, and change the course of life. In a small prehistoric band, every interaction mattered. Resources were scarce. Safety was precarious. Each individual had to navigate a delicate balance between self-interest and group survival. In this environment, tears were more than an expression. They were strategic instruments. A cry from a wounded companion could elicit protection. A child's whimper could draw food or comfort from a caregiver. Even the subtle tear glistening in an adult's eye could signal sincerity, remorse, or a plea for cooperation. In these ways, crying became a currency of trust, a medium through which needs and intentions were communicated without words. Anthropologists and evolutionary psychologists suggest that this was no accident. Humans are social animals, wired to respond to the distress of others. Tears act as visual amplifiers of vulnerability. Unlike other primates, humans produce emotional tears that convey chemical signals, stress hormones, and subtle cues of sincerity. These cues prompt observers to respond, triggering protective and nurturing behaviors. In effect, crying transformed emotion into a social tool, enabling individuals to influence the behavior of their peers, secure resources, and reinforce bonds of trust. Consider hunting expeditions, one of the most dangerous and cooperative endeavors of early humans. Imagine a hunter returning injured, struggling to stand. The eyes water, the lips tremble, and the body shakes with pain. Others witness these signs and respond, not because of language or negotiation, but because the tears signal authenticity and need. The injured hunter gains support, protection, and care. This is not merely compassion, it is an evolutionary adaptation. The ability to signal need and for the group to respond appropriately directly increases survival. Tears, in this context, are tools for both individual preservation and collective stability. But the utility of tears extends beyond immediate survival. They played a role in social cohesion and conflict management. Disputes within small groups could escalate dangerously. A well-timed tear could de-escalate tension, signaling remorse or humility. In effect, crying became a form of negotiation. It demonstrated emotional transparency, discouraged aggression, and promoted cooperation. By integrating vulnerability into social interactions, early humans established trust networks that allowed for larger, more cooperative groups, a crucial step in the evolution of complex societies. Even in mate selection, tears may have served as subtle tools. Humans are attracted to emotional intelligence, empathy, and the ability to read social cues. Those who could express vulnerability convincingly were likely perceived as trustworthy, caring, and socially aware, qualities essential for long-term bonding and cooperative parenting. Tears, therefore, were not just signals of need, they were markers of social competence, indicators that a potential partner could navigate the complex emotional landscape of human life. The strategic use of tears also underscores the interplay between biology and culture. While the production of tears is a biological phenomenon, the interpretation and response to tears are socially mediated. Early humans learned, through observation and experience, how to deploy crying to communicate, negotiate, and connect. They understood implicitly that tears could influence outcomes, forge alliances, and secure care. In this way, crying became a form of social intelligence, a tool as refined as any handcrafted weapon or hunting technique. Crying as a tool was not manipulative in a negative sense, it was functional. It enabled individuals to express needs that could not otherwise be met, to communicate distress without words, and to reinforce social bonds essential for survival. In the unpredictable landscapes of prehistory, these signals were as critical as physical strength, strategic thinking, or environmental knowledge. A tear could save a life, sustain a community, or cement an alliance, transforming emotion into a mechanism of resilience and cooperation. Furthermore, the act of crying often had reciprocal benefits. Those who responded to tears strengthened their own social bonds and reinforced their role within the group. Helping a grieving or injured companion was not altruism in isolation, it was an investment in the collective. Tears, in this sense, facilitated a feedback loop. Vulnerability prompted care, care reinforced trust, and trust enhanced group survival. Early humans discovered, perhaps instinctively, that emotional signals were not liabilities but instruments of mutual benefit. The adaptability of tears extended across many situations. A hunter mourning the loss of prey, a parent consoling a frightened child, a sibling expressing regret after a dispute, each scenario illustrates the versatility of crying as a tool. It was at once intimate and public, personal and communal, immediate and long-lasting. The physical act of tears carried meaning, shaped behavior, and influenced relationships, making emotion an active agent in human evolution. Even today, remnants of this ancient function remain. Modern humans still respond instinctively to tears. A coworker's quiet sob can elicit support, a friend's tears can deepen connection, a child's cry can mobilize attention. Across millennia, the strategic utility of crying persists. It is a testament to its evolutionary importance, a living relic of the first humans who discovered that vulnerability could be transformed into power, emotion into influence, and tears into tools of survival. In the broader sweep of prehistory, this understanding of crying reshaped the trajectory of human society. Vulnerability became a language, tears became signals, and emotional intelligence became a survival skill. The earliest humans who mastered this subtle art of influence, who could express and interpret emotion effectively, laid the foundation for cooperative behavior, social complexity, and ultimately, civilization itself. In essence, tears were more than water on the face, they were instruments, silently shaping behavior, fortifying trust, and enabling early humans to navigate a world defined by danger, scarcity, and uncertainty. By understanding the utility of vulnerability, humans transformed an emotional act into a strategic advantage, a tool that could alter both individual fate and the course of the species. In the story of our evolution, tears were as vital as tools of stone, fire, or language. They were instruments of survival, connection, and human ingenuity, a quiet power that changed the trajectory of our future. Long before the first words were spoken, humans had discovered a language older than speech, a language written not in letters or sounds but in gestures, glances, and the quiet flow of tears. This silent language of sorrow allowed early humans to communicate vulnerability, loss, and need in ways that were universally understood. It was subtle, immediate, and profound, conveying meaning without a single uttered syllable. In the prehistoric world, where words were yet to be forged, this nonverbal communication shaped survival, community, and the very fabric of human connection. In small groups of early humans, every signal mattered. Vocal cries could attract predators, and elaborate gestures were often too slow or clumsy in moments of danger. Tears, glistening eyes, and the trembling of the body conveyed urgency, authenticity, and need with an efficiency that words would later strive to match. A tearful glance could signal a child's distress, a companion's fatigue, or a parent's fear, all instantly recognizable by others. The silent language of sorrow was adaptive, ensuring that crucial social and survival information was transmitted without unnecessary risk. The human face, particularly the eyes, became the primary instrument of this communication. Subtle expressions, a furrowed brow, quivering lips, the moistening of the eyes, spoke volumes. Early humans developed an extraordinary sensitivity to these signals, honing the ability to interpret micro-expressions long before complex verbal language existed. Through observation and empathy, they learned to discern fear from pain, sadness from fatigue, and need from annoyance. This ability was more than emotional intelligence. It was a survival skill. Reading the silent cues of others allowed groups to respond appropriately, mitigate danger, and maintain cohesion. Silent sorrow also extended beyond the visual. The body itself became a messenger. A hunched posture, a shaking hand, or a slow, deliberate movement conveyed the weight of emotion. Early humans, living in environments of constant threat and uncertainty, relied on these physical signals to interpret the state of their companions. In the absence of words, bodies became storytellers, narrating experiences of pain, loss, or longing with clarity that the mind could not ignore. Crying, then, was not just an act, it was part of a larger system of embodied communication. Rituals of sorrow, even in their earliest forms, were extensions of this silent language. While we have little direct evidence of prehistoric mourning practices, archaeological discoveries suggest that humans engaged in communal expressions of grief, standing vigil over the deceased, arranging bodies with care, or marking places of loss with stones and other symbols. These acts, though devoid of words, communicated respect, empathy, and shared understanding. The silent language of sorrow created a bridge between the individual and the collective, allowing emotions to be transmitted across the group and even across generations. Consider the evolutionary implications. Groups that could read and respond to silent signals of distress were more likely to survive. Those who ignored or misinterpreted these cues risked alienating valuable members, failing to protect the vulnerable, or missing early warnings of danger. Tears and nonverbal sorrow were not passive expressions, they were functional signals guiding behavior, shaping alliances, and reinforcing social norms. In this sense, sorrow became a kind of social code, a pre-verbal grammar of human empathy that shaped the dynamics of early communities. The silent language of sorrow also facilitated learning. Children observing adults and older siblings absorbed the nuances of emotional expression. They learned when and how to display vulnerability, how to respond to the tears of others, and how to navigate the intricate web of social expectation. In this way, early humans transmitted emotional literacy across generations, creating a foundation for the complex social and moral frameworks that would later define human culture. Tears were teachers, micro-expressions were lessons, and sorrow itself was a curriculum in empathy. This language was deeply relational. A tear did not exist in isolation, it required an observer, a witness, someone to receive and respond. In small prehistoric bands, the act of expressing sorrow created an obligation for others to act, to console, protect, or assist. Silent sorrow thus reinforced reciprocity, trust, and cohesion. By sharing grief without words, early humans bound themselves together in networks of care, ensuring that the most vulnerable were not abandoned and that the group's survival was collectively prioritized. There is also a philosophical dimension to this silent language. Tears, gestures, and expressions of sorrow conveyed more than immediate need. They reflected consciousness, self-awareness, and the capacity to understand one's place within the group. To express sorrow silently was to communicate in the most elemental way: I am here. I feel. I belong. These messages were profound, touching not only survival but the human sense of identity and moral awareness. Through silent sorrow, humans began to articulate their experience of life even before they could give it words. Finally, the silent language of sorrow reminds us that human communication is not limited to words. Before speech, before writing, humans found ways to transmit meaning, emotion, and intent. Tears, glances, and gestures carried information that was essential for survival, shaping relationships and guiding behavior. In prehistory, this language was a lifeline, connecting individuals to one another, building empathy, and reinforcing the social bonds that allowed humanity to endure and flourish. In essence, the silent language of sorrow was a testament to the ingenuity of human emotion. It demonstrated that vulnerability could be powerful, that grief could communicate, and that even in the absence of words, humans could connect, influence, and protect one another. Through this language, our ancestors discovered that tears were not merely private expressions, they were tools of survival, markers of trust, and the foundation of human empathy. Long before humans could record events with written symbols, before the first cave painting or etched bone, tears were already leaving traces, etched into memory, woven into stories, and immortalized in the earliest forms of myth. They became more than biological reactions or social signals. They were vessels of meaning, carrying lessons, warnings, and reflections across generations. In a world where survival depended on knowledge, observation, and empathy, tears began to shape the collective consciousness of early humans, embedding sorrow, hope, and resilience into the very fabric of memory. Memory in prehistoric communities was not merely a cognitive function, it was survival. Remembering the faces of lost companions, the sounds of distress, and the gestures of mourning ensured that lessons from grief would guide future behavior. Tears were markers, signifiers of moments that mattered. A tearful parent mourning a child, a hunter sobbing over the loss of a prey animal, or a sibling grieving a fallen friend, all these acts became encoded in communal memory, forming narratives that taught, warned, and connected. Through memory, sorrow became a bridge between the present and the future, linking individual experiences to collective understanding. The earliest myths likely emerged from this interplay of tears and memory. Stories of sorrow, loss, and redemption circulated around firelight, passed orally from one generation to the next. These stories, often embedded in ritual and observation, preserved the emotional truths of human experience. They reminded listeners of the fragility of life, the importance of empathy, and the consequences of neglecting the needs of others. Tears, though silent and fleeting, became the catalysts for these narratives, imbuing them with emotional authenticity and moral weight. Consider a simple tale recounted by a prehistoric band. A young hunter loses his way and cries out for help. The group responds, guiding him safely back to camp. Over time, this story evolves, expanding into a myth that teaches the value of vigilance, cooperation, and attentiveness to one another's suffering. The tear that initially signaled vulnerability is transformed into a lesson, a story, and a cultural touchstone. In this way, tears became mnemonic anchors, linking individual experience to shared wisdom. Tears also played a role in ritualized memory. While direct evidence of prehistoric ceremonies is limited, archaeological findings, such as burial sites, grave goods, and ceremonial arrangements, suggest that humans engaged in acts of remembrance. These practices were more than symbolic. They were communal acknowledgments of loss, embedding sorrow into the physical and social environment. A tear shed over a fallen companion or child was witnessed, acknowledged, and memorialized. Through these acts, grief transcended the individual, entering the collective consciousness and shaping group identity. The mythic function of tears extends to the shaping of moral understanding. In observing sorrow, early humans learned about right and wrong, about obligation and care. A tear signaled not just personal suffering but social expectation. Groups came to understand that neglecting the vulnerable or ignoring grief could carry consequences, both emotional and practical. Conversely, responding to tears reinforced moral codes of empathy, protection, and cooperation. Through memory and myth, sorrow was elevated from mere feeling to a vehicle for social intelligence. Cultural memory, reinforced by storytelling, created patterns of behavior. Early humans internalized lessons from observed grief, learning how to respond to distress, how to comfort, and how to interpret subtle signals of need. These patterns informed the development of norms, values, and traditions. Tears, therefore, were not only emotional responses, they were instruments of cultural continuity. Through myth and memory, the experience of sorrow shaped behavior, strengthened cohesion, and transmitted wisdom across generations. The symbolic dimension of tears further amplified their impact. In myth, tears often carried transformative power. They were associated with purification, blessing, or even the creation of life itself. Some early narratives may have imagined tears as sacred, capable of influencing the natural world, appeasing spirits, or marking transitions between life and death. In these early symbolic frameworks, tears were both literal and metaphorical, tangible expressions of inner emotion and markers of cosmic significance. In this way, grief and its expression became intertwined with the emerging human imagination. Tears also functioned as mnemonic devices in social hierarchies. Leaders, elders, or storytellers who displayed sorrow could convey authority, credibility, and wisdom. Their grief carried lessons for the group, reinforcing norms and social structures. In witnessing these displays, community members internalized both emotional literacy and behavioral guidance. The expression of sorrow became intertwined with memory, instruction, and leadership, illustrating the multifaceted role of tears in shaping early human societies. Moreover, the interplay of tears, myth, and memory reinforced empathy on a generational scale. Children who observed sorrowful rituals, who listened to stories of grief and resilience, internalized these lessons. They learned to recognize vulnerability, respond to distress, and anticipate the needs of others. Over time, this cultivation of empathy became an evolutionary advantage, strengthening social cohesion and enhancing survival. Tears, once private and fleeting, thus contributed to the development of enduring social and moral frameworks. In essence, the silent, ephemeral act of crying became monumental in shaping human consciousness. It transformed grief into narrative, vulnerability into instruction, and emotion into enduring cultural memory. The first myths of sorrow carried not only the emotional truths of early humans but also practical guidance, moral insight, and social cohesion. Through tears, early humans encoded the wisdom of survival, the lessons of empathy, and the truths of mortality into stories that would echo across millennia. By tracing the trajectory from individual sorrow to collective memory, we begin to see how tears influenced not only immediate social interactions but also the long-term evolution of culture and consciousness. Grief, when observed, remembered, and retold, became a foundation for human morality, storytelling, and the imaginative capacity to understand the lives of others. It is through this lens that we recognize the power of tears to shape memory, myth, and the very architecture of human society. And so, in the flickering glow of prehistoric fires, in the quiet moments of communal observation, tears became more than personal expressions, they became instruments of legacy. They connected the living to the dead, the present to the future, and the individual to the group. Through myth and memory, sorrow acquired meaning beyond the moment, embedding itself in the human story and shaping the evolution of empathy, culture, and civilization itself. In the harsh landscapes of prehistory, survival was never an individual endeavor. Life demanded cooperation, coordination, and mutual care. In this context, crying became more than a personal expression, it became a social instrument, a catalyst for collaboration, and a mechanism for sustaining trust. Tears were not signs of weakness, they were tools of connection, signals that bound communities together and allowed early humans to navigate the precarious balance between danger and sustenance. Imagine a hunting party tracking a herd across the savannah. One member falters, injured by a misstep or an unexpected predator. The body trembles, lips quiver, eyes glisten with unshed tears. This display of vulnerability immediately shifts group dynamics. Companions respond instinctively, offering support, adjusting roles, and redistributing effort. Crying, in this scenario, is a social cue, an unspoken plea that triggers cooperative behavior and reinforces the interdependence that was essential for survival. From an evolutionary perspective, the connection between crying and cooperation is profound. Humans evolved as social animals, relying on networks of care for protection, resource sharing, and reproduction. Tears provided a mechanism to strengthen these networks. They signaled honesty, elicited empathy, and fostered reciprocal behavior. Groups that could interpret and respond to crying effectively had a survival advantage. Those who ignored or misread these signals risked alienating members, missing opportunities for collaboration, or failing to protect the vulnerable. In this way, tears were not merely emotional, they were adaptive. The chemistry of tears reinforces this connection. Emotional crying releases stress hormones and neuropeptides that communicate internal states to observers. Observing tears activates empathic neural circuits, prompting caregiving and cooperation. In essence, crying is a biologically embedded mechanism that turns individual distress into group cohesion. It is both signal and strategy, bridging private emotion and public action. The very physiology of tears evolved to enhance social survival. Cooperation facilitated by crying extends beyond immediate physical needs. Emotional displays help negotiate conflicts, establish alliances, and reinforce social hierarchies. Consider a disagreement within a small group. A subtle tear in the eye or a quivering expression of remorse can de-escalate tension, signaling accountability and sincerity. By responding appropriately, group members maintain cohesion, avoid destructive conflict, and strengthen the trust necessary for collective action. Crying, then, functions as a social lubricant, smoothing interactions and ensuring that cooperation remains feasible even in moments of tension. Parenting and caregiving offer some of the clearest examples of tears fostering cooperation. Infants, utterly dependent, cry to communicate hunger, discomfort, or fear. Caregivers respond, ensuring the child's survival while simultaneously reinforcing their own role in the social network. This reciprocal relationship, cry, response, care, extends to siblings, peers, and community members. Tears act as signals that demand attention, coordinate resources, and strengthen bonds. In prehistory, such mechanisms were essential for raising young successfully, ensuring that knowledge, skills, and survival strategies could be transmitted to the next generation. Cooperation mediated by crying also shaped group identity. Shared experiences of grief or distress created common emotional ground. Witnessing the tears of companions reinforced empathy, loyalty, and trust. It established a sense of we, a recognition that the group's survival depended on mutual responsiveness. Emotional signals thus contributed to the formation of social cohesion on both intimate and communal levels. Groups that understood and acted on these signals were more resilient, better coordinated, and more likely to endure in unpredictable environments. Cultural practices often reinforce this connection between tears and cooperation. Early humans may have developed informal rituals around grief, injury, or loss, codifying responses to tears in ways that strengthened social bonds. Standing vigil over the wounded, comforting the grieving, or collectively mourning the dead created frameworks of reciprocity and mutual obligation. These practices transformed individual suffering into collective responsibility, ensuring that emotional vulnerability directly translated into cooperative action. Even in everyday life, tears facilitated collaboration. A hunter signaling fatigue or distress through subtle cues received assistance. A companion expressing fear during a dangerous journey prompted shared vigilance. Emotional expression allowed groups to allocate tasks efficiently, distribute labor, and manage risk. Crying became a mechanism to synchronize behavior, aligning individual needs with the collective goals of the group. In this sense, tears functioned as an invisible coordinator, orchestrating social behavior with precision and subtlety. The evolutionary significance of crying and cooperation cannot be overstated. Groups that effectively leveraged tears for social coordination had clear advantages: higher survival rates, greater reproductive success, and stronger intergenerational transmission of knowledge and culture. Crying allowed early humans to harness the power of empathy, transforming emotional expression into practical action. Vulnerability became a strategic asset, turning private suffering into public benefit. Through this interplay, tears became a cornerstone of human social evolution. Crying also nurtured moral and ethical development. Responding to the tears of others reinforced norms of care, fairness, and responsibility. Early humans learned that ignoring distress had consequences, while attending to it strengthened trust and reciprocity. Over time, these patterns shaped the moral fabric of communities, embedding empathy and cooperation into cultural practices, rituals, and shared values. Tears, therefore, were not merely emotional or social, they were formative in the development of human morality itself. Through crying, early humans discovered the profound interdependence of emotion and action. Vulnerability was not weakness, it was a mechanism that bound individuals together, ensured cooperation, and enabled collective survival. In moments of grief, fear, or need, tears became the threads weaving individual experience into the tapestry of group life. They transformed solitary emotion into communal reality, shaping both the immediate behavior and long-term cohesion of human societies. In essence, crying and cooperation are inseparable. Tears signal need, empathy prompts response, and action strengthens trust. This cycle of vulnerability and reciprocity became foundational to human survival, influencing the structure, resilience, and culture of early communities. By recognizing the power of emotional signals, our ancestors leveraged crying as a tool of connection, coordination, and continuity, a force as critical to survival as fire, weapons, or foraging skills. And so, in the landscapes of prehistory, amidst the dangers and uncertainties of daily life, tears were not private indulgences. They were instruments of social intelligence, catalysts of cooperation, and mechanisms for collective resilience. In the interplay between crying and collaborative action, humans discovered that survival depended not only on individual skill but on the capacity to perceive, respond to, and act upon the emotions of others. Through this synergy, tears became more than emotion, they became a foundational element of human society. While the biological and evolutionary roots of crying shaped early humans, the expression of tears soon became intertwined with culture, ritual, and symbolism. Across the landscapes of prehistory, different communities began to interpret, ritualize, and respond to tears in ways that reflected their environment, beliefs, and social structures. Crying was no longer merely a survival mechanism or social signal. It became a cultural language, a medium through which humans understood emotion, morality, and identity. Anthropologists have found that societies, even those separated by vast distances and time, consistently imbue crying with layered meaning. Tears are simultaneously personal and collective, intimate and symbolic. In some groups, the act of crying in public reinforced social bonds, signaling shared grief or communal responsibility. In others, tears were private, controlled, or ritualized, reflecting norms about emotional expression, self-discipline, or social hierarchy. Across cultures, crying became a lens through which humans negotiated both internal experience and communal expectation. Consider ritualized mourning practices. Burial ceremonies in prehistoric sites reveal that grief was often expressed collectively. Artifacts, grave goods, and body arrangements indicate that tears and mourning were integrated into structured rites, transforming personal sorrow into a cultural performance. These rituals ensured that grief was witnessed, acknowledged, and memorialized, reinforcing social cohesion and transmitting knowledge about loss across generations. Crying, in this sense, was not only an emotional act but also a symbolic one, bridging the individual and the collective. Beyond death, tears played a role in rites of passage, reconciliation, and social negotiation. In many early communities, public displays of emotion marked transitions, from childhood to adulthood, from outsider to accepted member of the group, or from conflict to restored harmony. Tears communicated sincerity, humility, and commitment, allowing individuals to navigate complex social landscapes. Through these culturally mediated acts, crying became a tool not only of survival but also of social organization and moral expression. Even the interpretation of tears varied across environments and groups. In arid regions where survival was precarious and resources scarce, crying might have been restrained, valued for authenticity and carefully timed. In forested or coastal communities where danger was less immediate but social complexity greater, public crying may have been more frequent, ritualized, or theatrical. In each context, tears were a form of cultural intelligence, reflecting the interaction between biology, environment, and social norms. The symbolic dimension of crying also evolved alongside early spiritual and religious thought. Many prehistoric sites suggest that tears were linked to beliefs about life, death, and the supernatural. They were associated with purification, lamentation, or communication with unseen forces. In this way, tears became vessels of meaning beyond immediate social utility, connecting humans to ideas of fate, morality, and the cosmos. The act of crying was elevated from a practical response to an existential gesture, one that bridged the human and the transcendent. Cultural narratives preserved and amplified the significance of tears. Stories, songs, and oral traditions encoded lessons about grief, empathy, and social duty. Tears became symbols of moral and emotional intelligence, guiding behavior and reinforcing communal norms. These narratives ensured that the lessons embedded in crying, about cooperation, care, and vulnerability, were not lost but transmitted across generations, forming the backbone of early human moral consciousness. Cross-cultural comparisons reveal remarkable consistency in the functions of crying. Despite differences in environment, resources, or social complexity, tears universally serve as a bridge between the private and public, the emotional and the social, the individual and the collective. This universality underscores the profound evolutionary and cultural significance of crying. It is both biologically ingrained and culturally elaborated, a tool for communication, connection, and moral guidance across human societies. In addition, crying across cultures demonstrates the flexibility of human emotion. While the biological response is consistent, the social and cultural interpretations vary widely. Some societies encourage expressive grief, transforming sorrow into collective action, ritual, and art. Others value restraint, integrating crying into private or highly structured contexts. These variations illustrate how early humans adapted a shared emotional mechanism to their unique cultural and environmental circumstances, creating diverse expressions of empathy, mourning, and social cohesion. The study of prehistoric and early cultural crying offers profound insight into the human condition. It shows that tears are more than physical phenomena. They are integrally connected to social intelligence, moral reasoning, and cultural innovation. Across time and space, crying has served as a conduit for teaching, bonding, and influencing behavior, shaping the evolution of both human societies and human consciousness. By observing crying across cultures, we recognize that tears carry layers of meaning, biological, social, symbolic, and moral. They connect individuals to one another, embed personal experience within communal memory, and anchor emotional truth within cultural narratives. Crying becomes both a mirror and a map, reflecting the depth of human emotion while guiding interaction, cooperation, and understanding. Ultimately, the cross-cultural study of crying illuminates the universality of sorrow, the adaptability of emotion, and the profound influence of tears on human evolution. From prehistoric camps to early villages, tears were a language, a signal, and a ritual, a constant thread linking humanity across space and time. They were, in essence, a bridge between survival and society, biology and culture, individual experience and collective meaning. In the next section, Section 10, The Science of Tears, we will explore how modern biology, neuroscience, and psychology explain these ancient behaviors, revealing the mechanisms that made tears not only emotional responses but tools for communication, empathy, and survival. For centuries, tears were seen as purely emotional phenomena, poetic gestures or signs of human weakness. Yet modern science has revealed that crying is far more intricate, a biological, chemical, and neurological symphony finely tuned by evolution to communicate, regulate emotion, and strengthen social bonds. Understanding the science of tears allows us to glimpse how these ancient behaviors became essential tools for survival, cooperation, and empathy. Tears are not uniform. Scientists have identified three main types: basal, reflex, and emotional tears. Basal tears lubricate the eyes, protecting the cornea and maintaining vision. Reflex tears respond to irritants, dust, smoke, or onions, acting as a protective mechanism. Emotional tears, however, are uniquely human. They arise not from external stimuli but from complex inner experiences: grief, joy, frustration, empathy, and even awe. Emotional tears are laced with hormones, proteins, and neuropeptides, making them biologically distinct and socially potent. One key chemical in emotional tears is prolactin, a hormone associated with stress regulation. Prolactin levels rise during emotional crying, helping to reduce tension, calm the nervous system, and restore physiological equilibrium. In essence, tears function as a release valve for emotional pressure, allowing humans to process intense experiences without succumbing to physiological overload. From an evolutionary perspective, this regulatory function is invaluable. Early humans navigating perilous environments, constant threats, and social complexity would have benefited from any mechanism that helped manage stress and preserve focus. But the significance of tears extends beyond individual regulation. Emotional crying serves as a social signal, conveying authenticity, vulnerability, and need. Neuroimaging studies show that observing tears activates areas of the brain associated with empathy, caregiving, and social cognition. This means that tears are not merely visible signs, they are biologically encoded messages triggering responses that enhance cooperation, trust, and group cohesion. The evolutionary advantage is clear. Groups that responded to crying effectively ensured mutual protection, resource sharing, and reproductive success. Tears also communicate subtleties beyond verbal or gestural expression. The presence of tears enhances the perception of sincerity, signaling that a statement or plea is genuine. This ability to convey truth through emotion likely provided early humans with an essential survival tool, helping to distinguish allies from threats, honest signals from deception, and trustworthy companions from opportunistic individuals. Crying thus became an intersection of biology, psychology, and social strategy. Recent studies have further revealed that emotional tears contain stress-related hormones such as adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH. By excreting these compounds, tears may reduce the body's stress load, offering both physical and emotional relief. This biochemical function reinforces the dual role of crying. It serves the individual, managing internal states, and serves the group, signaling vulnerability that elicits social support. The earliest humans likely experienced these benefits without understanding the physiology, yet the evolutionary impact was profound. The neural mechanisms of crying are equally remarkable. Emotional tears activate a network involving the limbic system, the brain center for emotion, motivation, and memory. This system integrates past experience, current perception, and anticipated outcomes, allowing humans to respond adaptively to both personal distress and the distress of others. In practical terms, crying engages the mind and body in a feedback loop that promotes survival. The individual expresses emotion, the group perceives it, and cooperative action follows. Moreover, the production of tears is often accompanied by vocalizations, facial expressions, and posture changes, creating a multisensory signal that enhances its communicative power. A tearful face, quivering lips, and a low vocalization combine to convey a complex message: I am in need, I am vulnerable, and I seek connection. This multimodal signal is biologically optimized to elicit attention, empathy, and protective behavior. Evolution shaped crying not as a random reaction but as a precise social instrument, finely tuned to influence others. The science of tears also intersects with emotional and social learning. Observing the crying of others activates mirror neurons, which allow humans to simulate the emotional state of another. This capacity for shared experience underpins empathy, moral reasoning, and cooperative behavior. Early humans who could interpret and respond to the tears of companions were more likely to strengthen bonds, reinforce trust, and navigate complex social hierarchies. Tears, therefore, are not only expressive, they are educative, teaching members of a group how to care for, support, and understand one another. Interestingly, crying also has long-term cognitive benefits. Emotional release through tears has been associated with enhanced problem-solving, clearer thinking, and better memory consolidation. By allowing the mind to process intense feelings, tears facilitate reflection and adaptation. For early humans, this cognitive function would have been crucial in making decisions under pressure, learning from mistakes, and adapting behavior in ways that improved both individual and group survival. The universality of emotional crying highlights its evolutionary importance. Across cultures and historical periods, humans display similar patterns of tears in response to grief, loss, awe, or empathy. This suggests that emotional crying is hardwired, a shared trait that transcends language, environment, and social norms. Its persistence over millennia underscores the power of tears as both a biological and social adaptation, one that shaped the trajectory of human survival, cooperation, and culture. Ultimately, the science of tears illuminates why crying changed the course of our evolution. It is simultaneously physiological and social, personal and communal, instinctive and adaptive. Tears regulate emotion, signal need, strengthen bonds, and convey authenticity. They are biochemical releases, neurological signals, and social instruments all at once. In this, we see the remarkable convergence of biology and culture, a single human behavior that enhances survival, fosters empathy, and shapes the moral and social architecture of our species. From the first tears shed in the shadow of prehistoric forests to the silent sob of a parent comforting a child, crying has been a force of connection and adaptation. Modern science allows us to understand the mechanisms underlying this profound behavior, revealing that tears are far more than mere expressions of emotion. They are a cornerstone of human survival, communication, and social complexity. In the next section, Section 11, Tears and Empathy, we will explore how this biological and social power of crying laid the foundation for one of the most defining traits of humanity, the capacity to feel, understand, and respond to the emotions of others. Empathy, the ability to perceive, understand, and resonate with the emotions of others, is one of the defining traits of humanity. It is the bridge between individuals, the invisible thread that binds communities, and the foundation of moral and social life. Tears, as subtle and potent signals, are deeply intertwined with this capacity. In the earliest human societies, the act of crying did more than reveal personal distress. It elicited empathy, activated caregiving behaviors, and reinforced the social cohesion necessary for survival. From an evolutionary perspective, empathy is adaptive. Groups of humans who responded to the distress of others were more likely to survive. A band member, injured or threatened, would signal need through tears, a silent plea that could trigger protective action. Those who recognized and responded to these signals increased the survival chances of both the individual and the group. Empathy, therefore, was not merely a moral virtue. It was a survival mechanism refined by millennia of social evolution. Tears amplify empathy in ways that words alone cannot. Observing someone crying activates neural circuits associated with mirror neurons, allowing an observer to internally simulate the emotional state of the person in distress. This neurological resonance is the foundation of empathy, enabling humans to feel the sorrow, fear, or pain of another as if it were their own. In prehistoric societies, this capacity was crucial, providing an immediate emotional cue that demanded attention, care, and coordinated action. Consider caregiving in early human communities. A crying child signals need, eliciting nurturing behaviors from parents and other adults. But empathy does not stop there. Siblings, peers, and even unrelated members of the group may respond. Tears create a ripple effect, spreading concern and mobilizing resources. The act of crying thus transforms private vulnerability into collective action, reinforcing the bonds of trust, cooperation, and shared responsibility that allowed humans to endure challenging environments. Empathy shaped not only practical survival but also the moral and social norms of early human groups. Responding to tears reinforced values of care, responsibility, and cooperation. Ignoring the distress of others could lead to social sanction, ostracism, or even violence. Over generations, these patterns embedded empathy into the moral framework of human communities, shaping behavior in ways that extended far beyond immediate survival. Tears, then, were not only emotional signals but instruments of social learning and ethical development. Emotional tears also fostered cooperation in conflict resolution. In small prehistoric bands, disputes were inevitable, over resources, mating opportunities, or social dominance. Tears could act as conciliatory signals, demonstrating remorse, humility, or submission. By eliciting empathy, crying de-escalated tension, prevented violence, and promoted reconciliation. In this context, empathy mediated by tears was essential for maintaining group cohesion and stability. Vulnerability became a strategic tool, allowing humans to navigate social complexity without resorting to aggression. Moreover, empathy inspired by tears transcended kinship. While care for relatives is evolutionarily advantageous, the capacity to empathize with unrelated individuals expanded the scope of cooperation. Early humans who could respond to the distress of non-kin strengthened alliances, built trust, and created wider social networks. Tears, in this sense, were catalysts for extending empathy beyond immediate family, laying the groundwork for the intricate social structures that define human societies today. The role of tears in empathy also influenced cultural and ritual practices. In communal mourning, funerary rites, or ceremonies of loss, collective crying reinforced shared understanding, emotional resonance, and social solidarity. Observing the sorrow of others deepened emotional attunement, teaching members of the group how to recognize, interpret, and respond to grief. Tears became both pedagogical and performative, conveying lessons about emotional intelligence and shaping culturally mediated patterns of care. Even in everyday interactions, tears cultivate empathy. A subtle tear in a companion's eye, a tremor in the lips, or a quiver in the voice signals vulnerability and invites a response. This ongoing exchange reinforces social bonds and creates networks of mutual support. In essence, tears act as a social glue, translating individual emotion into collective understanding and motivating behavior that benefits both the individual and the group. Empathy mediated by tears is also deeply tied to human imagination and reflection. By witnessing the distress of others, humans learn to anticipate emotional responses, consider perspectives beyond their own, and navigate complex social dynamics. This capacity for perspective-taking, enhanced by crying, allowed early humans to predict behavior, plan cooperative strategies, and foster alliances, abilities that were critical for survival in unpredictable environments. Finally, empathy shaped by tears laid the foundation for the moral and philosophical dimensions of humanity. Recognizing and responding to the suffering of others is at the core of ethics, justice, and human culture. Prehistoric humans responding instinctively to tears developed the neural and social infrastructure that would later enable complex moral reasoning, ethical deliberation, and the cultivation of compassion as a social virtue. Through tears, empathy became a force that extended across generations, shaping both behavior and consciousness. In essence, tears and empathy are inseparable. Tears communicate vulnerability, activate caregiving behaviors, and create shared emotional experience. Empathy allows humans to interpret these signals, respond adaptively, and reinforce social cohesion. Together, they form a feedback loop, transforming individual emotion into collective resilience. The earliest humans who could cry, and who could respond to the cries of others, harnessed one of the most powerful forces in evolution, the ability to feel, understand, and act on the emotions of others. Through this lens, we see that crying is not simply an emotional reflex. It is a cornerstone of social intelligence, a driver of moral development, and a fundamental mechanism by which humans created trust, nurtured alliances, and built the networks that allowed civilization to emerge. Tears, in their quiet power, became a medium through which empathy flourished, ensuring that human survival depended not only on strength or cunning, but on the capacity to feel deeply, respond compassionately, and connect profoundly with others. Tears are not only a biological signal or social cue, they are also a vehicle for narrative, a thread that weaves human experience into stories that transcend individual lives. From the flickering firelight of prehistoric camps to the oral traditions of early villages, tears became central to storytelling, shaping the way humans remembered, taught, and connected across generations. They transformed private emotion into shared experience, allowing stories to carry the weight of human feeling, moral lessons, and collective memory. In prehistoric societies, storytelling was a vital mechanism for survival. Tales of hunting, danger, and natural phenomena conveyed practical knowledge. But stories that incorporated grief, loss, or vulnerability conveyed something even deeper, the emotional realities of human life. A tale of a lost companion, a child left behind, or a sorrowful hunt embedded lessons about empathy, cooperation, and moral responsibility. Tears, both real and imagined, enhanced these stories, giving them resonance and urgency that practical facts alone could not convey. Consider the role of tears in oral storytelling. When a narrator recounted the death of a loved one or a moment of collective grief, the audience responded emotionally, imagining themselves in the story. Tears, whether shed in reality or suggested in the narrative, bridged the gap between teller and listener, creating a shared emotional landscape. This connection strengthened social cohesion, reinforced communal norms, and transmitted not just information but feeling, a vital ingredient in teaching empathy and cooperation. Tears also enriched the memorability of stories. Humans are wired to remember emotionally salient events more vividly. When grief, loss, or joy is woven into a narrative, the story becomes more impactful and more likely to be transmitted across generations. Prehistoric humans may have instinctively recognized this, embedding the emotional dimension of life, expressed through tears, into the tales that guided survival, morality, and social understanding. Emotional resonance ensured that stories were not forgotten, preserving lessons long after the events themselves faded from memory. Beyond factual or moral instruction, tears played a role in mythmaking. Mythology is often rooted in the human attempt to understand forces beyond comprehension, life, death, fate, and the natural world. Tears in these stories symbolize vulnerability, transformation, or divine connection. They mark moments of trial and revelation, giving meaning to suffering and resilience. Through storytelling, tears become symbols that elevate human experience, linking individual emotion to universal truths. Early myths likely drew from observed grief, ritual mourning, and communal sorrow, encoding these experiences in narratives that shaped culture and belief systems. Storytelling with tears also created a sense of communal empathy. By witnessing or imagining the grief of others through narrative, individuals learn to interpret and respond to emotional signals even outside immediate social interaction. This extended the reach of empathy, allowing humans to practice compassion and understanding in imagined scenarios. The lessons of tears thus moved beyond survival utility, shaping social and moral intelligence in ways that guided behavior and strengthened group cohesion. In addition, tears and storytelling served as mnemonic devices. When a narrator dramatized sorrow or loss, listeners not only absorbed the plot but also internalized the associated emotional lessons. These emotional cues helped encode stories more deeply in memory, ensuring that the practical, moral, and emotional wisdom they contained would survive the passage of time. In this sense, tears were both content and tool, a means of reinforcing the narrative structure while teaching critical skills for social and emotional life. Tears also allowed for complexity in storytelling. They enabled humans to convey nuanced states of emotion, from grief to relief, sorrow to empathy, fear to awe. A story enriched with emotional detail invites the audience to inhabit multiple perspectives, deepening understanding and fostering cognitive and emotional flexibility. In this way, tears in narrative are more than expressive, they are pedagogical, teaching the audience how to perceive, interpret, and respond to the rich spectrum of human experience. Moreover, storytelling with tears connected the individual to the collective memory of the group. Shared stories infused with sorrow, joy, and empathy created a sense of identity and continuity. Communities remembered their ancestors, their losses, and their triumphs, and tears anchored these memories in the emotional fabric of society. Through storytelling, tears bridged time, linking past, present, and future, ensuring that the lessons embedded in grief and compassion were preserved for generations. Even today, the legacy of tears in storytelling persists. Modern narratives, from literature to film, continue to rely on the emotional power of crying to engage audiences, evoke empathy, and communicate meaning. Observing the consequences of tears, such as social support, approval, or rebuke, taught early humans about communal values. Who receives aid? Whose distress is acknowledged? Which behaviors elicit empathy or disapproval? Tears served as both lesson and feedback, encoding moral principles into lived experience. Over time, these repeated lessons formed the foundation of moral norms, social expectations, and ethical understanding. Moreover, tears helped humans navigate complex social hierarchies. Emotional expression revealed vulnerability, intention, and sincerity, guiding trust and alliance formation. Recognizing and responding to tears required judgment, ethical reasoning, and perspective-taking. These interactions strengthened social intelligence, ensuring that moral action was not arbitrary but informed by empathy, context, and consequence. Crying became a mechanism for teaching and reinforcing fairness, cooperation, and ethical responsibility. Tears also played a symbolic role in moral culture. In ritual and ceremony, crying often marked acts of repentance, devotion, or solidarity. These expressions communicated ethical awareness, humility, and recognition of communal standards. By participating in or witnessing ritualized crying, members internalized moral expectations, reinforcing shared ethical frameworks that governed behavior within the group. Emotion and morality became inseparable, intertwined through tears. Importantly, crying allowed morality to extend beyond kinship. Responding to the distress of non-relatives required a moral imagination, recognizing that the suffering of others, even strangers, mattered. This expansion of empathy underpins universal moral reasoning, justice, and the development of human rights. Tears acted as catalysts, prompting care, compassion, and ethical action even outside immediate familial or tribal bonds. Early humans who responded to tears cultivated broader moral networks, strengthening group survival and social cohesion. The intersection of tears and morality also facilitated long-term social learning. Emotional experiences encoded through crying informed future behavior, shaping both individual conscience and collective ethics. Humans learned which actions were virtuous, which behaviors harmed others, and how to act in ways that aligned with communal values. Through tears, morality became tangible, felt, and remembered, a deeply embodied system guiding choices, alliances, and conduct. Ultimately, crying and morality are inseparable. Tears illuminate human vulnerability, evoke empathy, and signal ethical obligations. They create a feedback loop. Emotional expression informs moral action, which reinforces social bonds, ethical reasoning, and communal survival. In prehistoric societies, this interplay laid the foundation for conscience, justice, and pro-social behavior. Crying transformed emotion into ethical guidance, linking biology, social intelligence, and morality in ways that continue to define humanity. Through the lens of tears, we see that morality is not merely a cognitive construct, it is an emotional and social phenomenon. Vulnerability, empathy, and responsiveness are encoded in our biology, expressed through crying, and internalized through communal interaction. By observing, responding to, and learning from tears, early humans cultivated the moral sensibilities that would shape societies, laws, and cultural norms for millennia. Tears were, in essence, one of the first moral instruments, guiding behavior, teaching compassion, and ensuring the ethical survival of the human species. The evolutionary story of crying did not end in prehistoric times. Its legacy echoes profoundly in modern humanity. Though our societies have transformed dramatically, the biological, social, and moral mechanisms honed over millennia continue to shape how we respond to emotion, vulnerability, and connection. In contemporary life, tears remain a bridge between internal experience and social engagement, linking our evolutionary past to the complexities of modern existence. In today's world, crying retains its role as an emotional signal, albeit in contexts far removed from hunting or foraging. Workplace stress, familial conflict, and personal loss all evoke tears, and these expressions continue to influence social behavior. When someone cries, observers instinctively respond, guided by neural circuits and empathetic instincts shaped over thousands of generations. These responses reinforce relationships, promote cooperation, and signal authenticity. Despite societal norms, the crying in modern humanity also continues to facilitate empathy. In the age of digital communication, witnessing grief or joy through text, video, or social media triggers similar neural responses as in direct, in-person observation. Emotional resonance still elicits care, concern, and supportive action. The human brain, wired to respond to tears, interprets these signals as urgent, compelling, and morally significant. The evolutionary advantage of empathy, encoded in our biology, persists, influencing so. Moreover, crying plays a critical role in relationship formation and maintenance. Romantic partners, family members, and friends rely on emotional transparency to build trust, intimacy, and understanding. Tears communicate vulnerability and need, inviting responsiveness and reinforcing bonds. The mechanisms that prehistoric humans relied upon for survival, responding to the distress of others, remain central to the maintenance of complex, emotionally rich relationships. Crying is no longer just about IMD. In therapeutic contexts, the significance of crying is particularly striking. Psychologists and counselors recognize the cathartic and restorative function of tears. Crying allows individuals to process intense emotions, confront grief, and integrate life experiences. This mirrors the reflective function of tears in prehistoric societies, where emotional processing guided learning, moral reasoning, and social adaptation. Modern therapy reveals that tears are not merely expressive, they are cognitive and crying also continues to shape cultural expression. Art, literature, film, and music all rely on emotional engagement, often invoking tears to communicate meaning. By eliciting emotional responses, creative works foster empathy, shared reflection, and social cohesion. The roots of this cultural function extend deep into prehistory, where tears were embedded in storytelling, ritual, and communal identity. Today, we experience these ancient mechanisms in symbolic, mediated, and aesthetic forms, demonstrating. Social norms surrounding crying, however, have evolved. In many modern cultures, public displays of emotion, especially by men, are discouraged or stigmatized. Yet the biological and emotional imperatives remain. Suppression of tears can lead to stress, isolation, and reduced social bonding. Conversely, appropriate emotional expression facilitates connection, cooperation, and psychological health. The tension between evolved tendencies and cultural expectations illustrates how deeply ingrained crying is. Crying also mediates moral and ethical engagement in contemporary society. Witnessing suffering, whether in person, through media, or in humanitarian crises, elicits tears and motivates pro-social action. Charitable giving, volunteering, advocacy, and collective support are often catalyzed by emotional resonance, just as prehistoric humans were guided to act by the distress of others. The biological and social circuits that evolved to respond to tears continue to shape human morality, demonstrating the cont. In addition, modern neuroscience confirms what evolution has long suggested: tears are not incidental but functional. They reduce stress, modulate emotional states, and facilitate social communication. Physiologically, tears activate the parasympathetic nervous system, releasing tension and promoting recovery. Socially, they signal authenticity, eliciting care and understanding from others. Emotionally, they deepen empathy, insight, and self-reflection, the mechanisms that aided survival in prehistoric E. Furthermore, crying in modern humans reflects the interplay of individual experience and collective culture. Rituals such as funerals, weddings, and commemorations continue to integrate tears as a central element, marking significance, shared emotion, and communal identity. Even in secular contexts, collective mourning or celebration reinforces social cohesion and emotional literacy. The evolutionary function of tears is thus preserved within cultural frameworks, demonstrating that crying is both biology. Ultimately, crying is a living link between our evolutionary past and our present humanity. It shapes learning, memory, empathy, morality, and culture. It connects individuals to one another, binds communities together, and facilitates the reflection and processing necessary for personal and social growth. Though the threats, contexts, and environments have changed dramatically, the power of tears endures. Modern humans, like our prehistoric ancestors, rely on crying to communicate, understand, and navigate. Through this lens, we see that tears are far more than a biological reflex. They are evolutionary instruments, cultural markers, and moral guides. They remind us of our vulnerability, our capacity for empathy, and our shared humanity. From the flickering fires of prehistoric camps to the complex networks of contemporary society, crying continues to shape who we are, how we relate, and how we understand ourselves and each other. Crying is as much a biological phenomenon as it is an emotional expression. Beneath the surface of social signals and cultural meaning lies a complex interplay of neurological, physiological, and biochemical mechanisms. Understanding the science of tears illuminates why this simple act has such profound influence on human emotion, learning, morality, and social cohesion, bridging the gap between biology and the human experience. Tears are produced by the lacrimal glands, small structures located above the outer corner of each eye. These glands secrete three distinct types of tears: basal, reflex, and emotional. Basal tears maintain eye health, keeping the cornea lubricated and protecting it from dust and pathogens. Reflex tears respond to irritants, onions, smoke, or injury, acting as a protective mechanism. Emotional tears, however, are unique to humans, and they carry both physiological and psychological significance. Emotional tears contain a different chemical composition than basal or reflex tears. Research has shown that they include higher levels of stress-related hormones such as cortisol, prolactin, and adrenocorticotropic hormone. By releasing these chemicals, crying may help regulate the body's stress response, reducing tension and promoting emotional equilibrium. In essence, tears function as a form of self-soothing, helping the nervous system recover from intense emotional or physiological states. Emotional. The neurological mechanisms of crying are equally intricate. Emotional tears are triggered by activity in the limbic system, the brain center for emotion. Within this system, the amygdala evaluates emotional stimuli, while the hypothalamus regulates autonomic responses, including tear production. The prefrontal cortex integrates this information, modulating emotional expression based on social context and personal regulation. The act of crying is thus a product of multiple neural pathways linking cognition. Crying also activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the branch of the autonomic nervous system responsible for rest, recovery, and homeostasis. This activation explains the feelings of release and calm often experienced after a bout of tears. Heart rate may slow, breathing may deepen, and muscle tension may decrease. In prehistoric contexts, These physiological effects likely contributed to survival by reducing stress, conserving energy, and maintaining emotional balance during periods of social or socially. Tears serve as a communication tool encoded in both biology and evolution. Humans are exceptionally attuned to emotional signals, including crying. The sound, appearance, and context of tears trigger empathetic responses in observers, often eliciting comfort, assistance, or cooperative behavior. Mirror neurons, neurons that fire when we observe the actions or emotions of others, facilitate this process. When we witness tears, our brains simulate the associated emotion, allowing us to feel and psychologically, crying has profound effects on cognition and emotional regulation. Emotional expression through tears helps process complex feelings, facilitating introspection and problem solving. By acknowledging and externalizing distress, humans can organize thoughts, confront dilemmas, and integrate experiences into coherent narratives. In this sense, crying functions as an adaptive cognitive tool, aiding learning, reflection, and emotional intelligence. It bridges the internal and external worlds. Interestingly, crying also intersects with moral cognition. Observing another person's tears triggers neural networks associated with empathy, moral reasoning, and social decision-making. Functional imaging studies reveal activation in areas such as the anterior insula and the anterior cingulate cortex, regions involved in understanding others' pain and responding ethically. Tears, therefore, are not merely passive expressions, they actively shape social cognition, ethical behavior, and interpersonal DY. Evolution has wired humans to respond to these signals, reinforcing cooperation, fairness, and empathy. Cultural variation also influences the expression and interpretation of tears, though the biological mechanisms remain consistent. Societies differ in how they encourage or suppress crying, the contexts in which tears are appropriate, and the meanings attributed to emotional expression. Despite these differences, the physiological and neurological underpinnings remain universal, demonstrating that bio-emotional crying is both innate and socially mediated, a convergence of evolution, psychology, and cultural practice. The study of tear composition, neural activation, and social effects reveals a remarkable truth: crying is multifunctional. It regulates physiology, processes emotion, communicates social cues, reinforces morality, and enhances learning and memory. Each tear carries layers of information, biological, emotional, and social, reflecting the profound integration of mind, body, and culture. Ultimately, the science of tears underscores the depth of their influence. They are not accidental, trivial, or weak. They are a sophisticated evolutionary adaptation intricately tied to survival, social cohesion, and human development. By understanding the biology and neuroscience of crying, we gain insight into why this ancient behavior remains central to human experience, shaping our connections, morality, and emotional intelligence. Tears, while biological and social, are also profoundly philosophical. They speak to the human condition in ways that transcend survival, morality, and culture. In every drop, there is a reflection of our vulnerability, our consciousness, and our search for meaning. From the flickering shadows of prehistoric caves to the quiet solitude of a modern bedroom, crying confronts the deepest questions of existence. What does it mean to suffer, to feel, to be human? At their core, tears acknowledge impermanence. They remind us that life is fragile, fleeting, and uncertain. When we cry, we confront the inevitability of loss, the transience of joy, and the relentless passage of time. Prehistoric humans may have cried at the death of a companion, the loss of sustenance, or the unpredictability of nature. Modern humans cry at failure, heartbreak, injustice, and reflection. Across millennia, tears mark our awareness of mortality, anchoring us in the stark beauty and inev. Tears are also an expression of existential authenticity. Philosophers such as Kierkegaard and Nietzsche reflect on the human experience of vulnerability, suffering, and self-realization. Crying externalizes the internal. It bridges private consciousness and outward reality, revealing truths that words alone cannot convey. In this sense, tears are a form of existential articulation, signaling both recognition of limitation and assertion of being. They affirm that despite fragility, the self persists and, moreover, tears embody the tension between isolation and connection. The act of crying is deeply personal, yet it is simultaneously relational. Even when we cry alone, we are shaped by the knowledge of other human beings who could, would, or have witnessed such moments. Tears remind us that suffering is universal, that vulnerability is shared, and that emotional honesty is a conduit for empathy. Philosophy teaches that recognizing this shared human condition fosters wisdom, compassion, and ethical crying also intersects with the search for meaning. Viktor Frankl, in his reflections on suffering and purpose, emphasizes that human beings seek significance even amidst pain. Tears crystallize this pursuit, giving emotional form to experiences that might otherwise be inexpressible. When one cries at grief, awe, or joy, the act is simultaneously cathartic and reflective, offering insight into personal values, desires, and existential orientation. Tears are both revelation and meditation, pointing toward. Philosophically, tears also challenge conventional notions of strength and weakness. In many cultures, crying is stigmatized as a sign of vulnerability or deficiency. Yet human evolution and moral philosophy suggest the opposite. Emotional openness is adaptive, socially intelligent, and ethically potent. Crying demonstrates awareness, sensitivity, and the capacity for reflection. It is a courageous act, confronting pain rather than suppressing it. Philosophers have long noted that wisdom arises from ember. Tears further engage with temporality. They are ephemeral, fleeting, yet they carry weight far beyond their moment. In crying, we experience the present acutely while reflecting on the past and anticipating the future. Grief recalls what was lost, relief or catharsis anticipates renewal, compassion or empathy anticipates response. Tears embody a temporal awareness that is uniquely human, a consciousness that situates the self within the continuum of existence. This temporal depth gives crying a philosophy. Crying is also a meditation on relationality and ethics. By witnessing or responding to tears, humans exercise judgment, care, and moral imagination. Tears provoke reflection on obligations, interdependence, and responsibility. Philosophy emphasizes that ethical life is inseparable from awareness of others' suffering. Through crying, both giving and receiving, we cultivate insight into the balance of self and society, the dynamics of justice and compassion, and the ethical frameworks that sustain karma. Tears, then, are not merely private, they are moral and relational instruments. The philosophical dimension of crying extends to aesthetics and art. Artists, writers, and musicians have long recognized the power of tears to convey universal truths. In literature, a character's grief can evoke profound reflection on love, loss, or justice. In music, the swell of emotion often mirrors the ebb and flow of tears, resonating with listeners' inner landscapes. Through these artistic expressions, crying becomes. Finally, tears are a reminder of the paradoxes inherent in human existence. They are at once fragile and powerful, private and social, biological and philosophical. They confront suffering while opening the door to joy, loss while fostering connection, vulnerability while cultivating wisdom. In every tear lies a microcosm of humanity itself, complex, imperfect, and profoundly aware. Philosophically, crying embodies the essence of being human, a recognition of limitation, a pursuit of understanding, and crying is one of humanity's most ancient and enduring traits. From the earliest humans in prehistoric landscapes to contemporary societies, tears have been a constant companion, shaping our survival, our culture, our morality, and our understanding of the self. The journey of tears is a journey through the human condition itself, a lens through which we can trace evolution, society, emotion, and meaning, revealing how a single act of vulnerability has influenced our collective st. In prehistory, tears were a tool of survival. They signaled distress, elicited help, and guided social cooperation. When a member of a small interdependent group cried, others responded, ensuring the survival of both individual and community. Tears communicated what words could not, conveying fear, loss, or danger in ways that reinforced bonds and preserved life. In this context, crying was adaptive, functional, and deeply intertwined with human evolution. It was a mechanism that strengthened the group. As humans developed social complexity, tears continued to serve as a moral and ethical instrument. They guided behavior, reinforced cooperation, and cultivated empathy. Observing another's distress prompted care, teaching early humans about fairness, responsibility, and reciprocity. Over time, this emotional communication became embedded in moral reasoning, forming the foundation of social norms and ethical principles. Tears were, in essence, a language of morality, a silent but powerful guide to ethica. The evolution of culture magnified the significance of crying. Rituals, art, and storytelling integrated tears into communal life, transforming private emotion into shared meaning. Prehistoric humans incorporated grief, awe, and joy into ceremonies, narratives, and artistic representation. This integration preserved memory, encoded values, and reinforced communal identity. Through crying, emotion became cultural capital, transmitting wisdom, lessons, and social cohesion across generations. Tears were no. Modern humans continue to carry this legacy. In contemporary societies, crying shapes relationships, empathy, and emotional intelligence. Though norms may stigmatize or constrain tears, the underlying biological and psychological mechanisms remain unchanged. Emotional expression fosters intimacy, strengthens bonds, and facilitates learning and reflection. Crying is a bridge between vulnerability and connection, reminding us that human life is both deeply personal and inherently relational. The evolution of science has illuminated the depth of this phenomenon. Neuroscience, psychology, and biology reveal that tears are far from superficial. They regulate emotion, reduce stress, and enhance cognitive processing. They communicate social signals that trigger empathy, cooperation, and moral reasoning. Chemical, neural, and physiological evidence confirms that crying is a sophisticated adaptation, integrating biology, cognition, and social intelligence. Every tear carries meaning, processing both internal state. Philosophically, tears confront us with the essence of being human. They embody vulnerability, impermanence, and authenticity. Through tears, we experience the full spectrum of life, grief, joy, awe, loss, and connection. They are reminders of mortality, guides to empathy, and expressions of existential awareness. Tears teach us that emotion is not weakness but insight, that acknowledging our limitations fosters connection and wisdom, and that the human condition is defined by the interplay of fragility. The legacy of tears also highlights the integration of individual and collective experience. Crying simultaneously reflects personal emotion and social reality. It strengthens the bonds that make communities resilient, communicates lessons that sustain culture, and enforces ethical frameworks that guide behavior. Through the evolution of tears, humans learn not only to survive but to live together, to create meaning, and to navigate the profound landscapes of emotion, morality, and identity. Importantly, tears remind us that evolution, culture, morality, and philosophy are interconnected. Biology shapes behavior, behavior informs culture, culture encodes morality, and morality is illuminated by reflection and philosophy. Crying is the thread that weaves these domains together, demonstrating that human emotion is a complex, adaptive, and deeply meaningful phenomenon. It is at once instinct, signal, social glue, and existential meditation. In reflecting on the journey of crying, we see its multifaceted legacy. It is a story of survival, communication, and learning. It is a story of culture, ritual, and artistic expression. It is a story of morality, empathy, and ethical engagement. And it is a story of consciousness, reflection, and philosophical insight. Across millennia, tears have been central to what it means to be human, linking our biological heritage with our social structures, cultural achievements, and moral sensibilities. Finally, the legacy of tears is a testament to the power of vulnerability. Through crying, humans embrace emotion, acknowledge impermanence, and connect with one another. Tears allow us to process grief, celebrate joy, reflect deeply, and act ethically. They are a living testament to our capacity for empathy, wisdom, and shared humanity. In every moment of emotion, whether in prehistoric camps, artistic creation, moral reflection, or personal introspection, tears remind us of our connection to one another. As we conclude this exploration, it becomes clear that crying is far more than a biological reflex or social cue. It is an evolutionary instrument, a moral guide, a cultural medium, and a philosophical mirror. The act of shedding tears is an enduring legacy, shaping our past, defining our present, and influencing our future. Tears are, in every sense, a testament to what makes us human, a living bridge between biology, emotion, culture, morality, and consciousness. In understanding the legacy of tears, tears are a thread that weaves through the tapestry of human history, linking prehistoric survival, cultural expression, moral reasoning, and modern consciousness into a continuous human experience. From the first humans huddled around flickering fires to the bustling cities of the 21st century, crying has remained a constant, unbroken conduit for emotion, reflection, and connection. In tracing tears across time, we witness a living continuum, a testament to humanity's In the earliest human societies, tears were survival tools. They communicated need, distress, and social signals essential for group cohesion. A tear shed at the sight of a predator, a lost companion, or an uncertain future was more than a reflex, it was a call for assistance, a signal to the community, and a bridge between individual and collective survival. Over millennia, these small acts of vulnerability built the foundation for complex social bonds, teaching humans that emotion could be harnessed. As humans evolved, tears became more than immediate signals, they became embedded in culture. Prehistoric rituals, storytelling, and art incorporated crying as a symbol of shared experience. Laments marked significant life events, cave paintings immortalized grief and awe, and communal mourning fostered empathy and solidarity. Tears became a vehicle for collective memory, transmitting lessons, values, and cultural norms across generations. What began as an instinctive response evolved into a sophistic. The moral dimension of tears deepened over time. Observing another's distress continued to elicit ethical reflection and pro-social behavior. Tears guided early humans in negotiating fairness, justice, and reciprocity, forming the scaffolding of moral consciousness. By responding to emotion, humans learned the consequences of their actions, internalized ethical principles, and cultivated empathy. Across the ages, tears have remained a subtle but powerful instrument of moral development, linking biologica. In modern societies, tears continue to shape human experience in profound ways. Despite technological advancement, urbanization, and cultural shifts, crying retains its evolutionary functions. It strengthens bonds in families, romantic partnerships, and friendships. It communicates distress, joy, or awe, and it fosters emotional regulation and psychological healing. Crying is both intimate and social, private and universal, reflecting our biological heritage while adapting to the demands of contemporary. The continuity of tears across time demonstrates their centrality to the human condition. The science of tears illuminates this continuity. Neurological and physiological studies reveal that the mechanisms underpinning crying, hormonal release, parasympathetic activation, limbic system involvement, and mirror neuron response, have remained remarkably consistent over millennia. These biological foundations, combined with evolving cultural and moral contexts, show that crying is both ancient and adaptive. Philosophically, tears provide a lens through which to understand the constancy and complexity of human existence. They embody vulnerability, impermanence, and authenticity. They confront mortality while forging connection. They externalize internal reflection and ethical awareness. Across the span of human history, tears have been a mirror of consciousness, a symbol of shared experience, and a marker of wisdom. Each tear links an individual moment to a continuum of human thought, feeling, and sociality. Art and literature have long celebrated this continuity. Across time, creators have captured the essence of tears, translating emotion into visual, textual, and auditory forms. From prehistoric carvings to modern novels, paintings, and cinema, tears are depicted as conduits of truth, empathy, and human insight. Through these expressions, the universality of crying is preserved and transmitted, bridging generations, cultures, and experiences. Artistic representation ensures that tears remain not just bio. Crying also unites humans across cultures and epochs. Though norms regarding public expression, gender, and context vary, the underlying biology and emotional resonance remain universal. A mother mourning a child in one era, a poet weeping in solitude in another, or a modern individual overwhelmed by grief or joy, all tap into the same evolutionary, emotional, and philosophical currents. This continuity emphasizes the shared humanity that tears reveal, connecting individuals across time, space, and cirque. Moreover, tears illustrate the dynamic interplay between evolution, culture, morality, and philosophy. They demonstrate that biological instincts are shaped by social context, that culture encodes moral lessons, and that reflection imbues action with meaning. The act of crying is thus an ongoing synthesis of past and present, personal and collective, practical and symbolic. It is a living bridge between the origins of humanity and its modern expression, a testament to adaptability, continuity, and share. Ultimately, tears are a human continuum. They trace a path from the vulnerability of prehistoric survival to the richness of modern social and emotional life. They shape culture, morality, and consciousness. They reflect the paradoxes of existence, fragility and strength, individuality and connection, suffering and insight. By observing, understanding, and embracing tears, we recognize the threads that connect our ancestors to ourselves, revealing the enduring power of emotion to guide, connect, and ill. In embracing this continuum, we honor both the ancient and contemporary significance of tears. They are living evidence of our evolutionary journey, our moral and cultural development, and our capacity for reflection, empathy, and wisdom. Every tear carries history, meaning, and potential, a connection to the past, a guide for the present, and a promise for the future. Tears remind us that across time, humanity has always been defined not only by thought and action but by the profound depth of feeling.